rest in the goodness of God.
Hello, welcome to Pastor's Perspective.
So God sent his son Jesus.
And I'll tell you, we have seen time and time again God, setting people free.
Oh, well, thank you very much for your answer.
Let's start with something that was sent in on Facebook Messenger. Mike wrote in, how does a saved believer in Christ go about teaching others about God's moral laws without feeling hypocritical, when we ourselves feel guilt knowing that our own lives are still not perfect and without sin, but rather in a lifelong process of sanctification? Bobby, what would you say first?
Well, what the question just did is what I would encourage him or her to do. And that is to just acknowledge that this is a standard that I fall short of and that we all fall short of. And so just because we find ourselves struggling and wrestling to meet the moral demand doesn't mean that we don't have a right to talk about it. In fact, Jesus gave some advice to people that were hypocrites. Before you try to remove the speck from another person's eye, remove the log from your own. So what Jesus was teaching us in that is not that we are not to judge, but we are to judge rightly. And so we live in a culture that says, do not judge, do not judge, do not judge. But that was actually Jesus teaching us how to make judgments. First, remove the log from your own eye so you can then see the speck properly in someone else's. So I think the way we go about talking about the moral laws that God calls us to is we do self-evaluation first, we confess that, and then we humbly share that with others when we're talking. So we could say things like, isn't it overwhelming sometimes how hard it is to keep maybe this moral law when temptation comes our way? And people will be able to meet you in that.
Yeah. Mike, would you add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it partly depends on how you're using it. There's different ways to use the law. If somebody's trying to use it to say, hey, you got to do these things to please God, that's a problem with not understanding the purpose of the law. But if you're saying, for example, and I think this is a conversation we need to have more broadly in the culture, because we have to talk about civil righteousness, the civil use of the law, because regardless of whether people come to Christ or not, I think we would all like to see less wickedness and evil in the culture, in society. We would like to see more outward conformity to the law, goodness. And so, like, one way I think C.S. Lewis talked about it in his book, Mere Christianity. I like how he compared morality to the human body to a machine like a car. And you wouldn't say you're being legalistic or hypocritical by saying, hey, the car maker has an owner's manual and it says, put this kind of oil in this place, put this much air in the tires, do this. And that's how it's meant to run. That's what the moral law is. So rather than a holier than thou kind of a thing, which I think, sharing the moral law of God with a non-believing friend, it can kind of come off that way. Like, this is my righteousness, my moral law, and I'm looking down on you. It can be like, no, like, out of love, I want you to function optimally, right? Like with your physical health, for example. I say, hey, that stuff will kill you that you're eating right there. It tastes really good, but you know what's in it. And you're like, I'm not saying that to look down on you. I'm saying it genuinely because I want to help you. And same thing with the moral law, with sexual ethics. I think we can approach it that way. Like, hey, your body was made by God to function a certain way. And you can say on the one hand, well, I have the right to do whatever I want with my own body or my own car, however I want. Yeah, you can say it's my car, I can do whatever I want. But if you start putting oil in the gas tank, gas in the oil tank, water in your tires, your car's going to break down. And you can argue all day long you've got the right to do it, but meanwhile you're destroying it. And I think there can be a compassionate, sympathetic way to share the moral law with non-believers. God did not give any law because he hates you. He gave them because he loves you. He made you, and this is what you were made for, and you're not going to function properly until you are following God's law. And again, that's not a salvific statement, right? We're just talking about outward conformity, how civil righteousness, as far as actually being right with Christ, we know that faith alone in him, because only Christ is actually perfectly obeyed the law in the first place. So again, it would kind of depend. Are they talking about moral law regarding a sinner and God, or human beings living with one another in civil society.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts too that I'd add, guys, is we need to understand the person that we're wanting to talk to about this, or the audience, because we're living in a culture where some people believe that they are postmodern in their mindset. So when you think about history, say from, about 400 till the Reformation, you've got the pre-modern era. And then you have the modern era in the 17th and 18th century with the Age of Enlightenment that was taking place in England, and the postmodern era that really, took shape with Friedrich Nietzsche, who died in 1900, and then up in to our time in this past century with the likes of Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Lyotard, Richard Rorty. And these are people that basically were postmodern. And so what does that mean? Postmoderns reject absolutes as it relates to truth. And so they'll say when it comes to morality, morality is relative. You can't be objective about morality. Interestingly enough, Kant, Immanuel Kant from Königsberg, he was the great philosopher, and many people will think of him as a rationalist. That, in other words, would see that there is an objective reality, but that's not the case with Kant. Kant distinguished between two realms, the noumenal and the phenomenal realm. And the noumenal realm to Kant was the world in itself. And the phenomenal realm is the world as it appears to us. To Kant, you can't know a thing in itself. You can't get outside of yourself to reality. And so subsequently what that means is people would later pick up, postmoderns, on that Kantian idea and basically say, there is no moral law. Right. There are no objective morals. And so as a result, people have been influenced by this stuff in a powerful way. And so now where we are as a culture is in a culture that kind of rejects absolute truth, rejects morals. And then you go, well, how do I talk to them about a moral law? Mm-hmm. Well, I think our conversations in evangelism might need to look a little bit differently. I've been thinking about a culture that we now live in that says, the things that we call sin are actually good. Like, for example, LGBTQ, that's good. Divorce, that's good. Smoking drugs, that's good. Do whatever you want, that's good, right? And postmodernism, what they'll do is they actually are Machiavellian in the sense that they'll say whatever they want to say to achieve whatever they want to achieve. So they say these irrational things because what their ultimate goal is power. Mm-hmm. So they're trying to overthrow all these things. So overthrow traditional marriage with LGBTQ. Overthrow, differences between, get rid of the white class and say that they're the dominant one. Get rid of the man and say that they're the oppressor. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's going on. So now we're going to be having conversations with people that think, okay, well, guess what? There is no moral law. Well, they are being told that the things that we believe inside the church that are sin, they're told that those things are good. So I've been trying to think about, what does a conversation with those people look like then? Maybe we start with a question like, instead of like, how do you judge someone on the moral law? How is your life working out for you with your worldview that you have? In other words, we don't hear about the consequences, but we have to believe that, using all the drugs you want, having all the sex you want, violating God's law, we have to believe that consequences are there. So what we want to show them then is the disconnect between what they believe to be good, that if it's good, then why is it producing so many consequences? Yeah. Because what we get in Psalm 1 is our life of goodness and blessing for walking according to God's truth. So all that to say, I think we need to really help people to understand that the things that they think are good are creating consequences in their life.
Yeah, it's. I'm glad you waded into a lot of that, because it is crazy how so many of these philosophical ideas, even at the academic level, trickle down even over hundreds of years. Like, a lot of the stuff has been there floating around, but it's just spilling downhill faster and faster till it's just mainstream culture, and with technology and the internet. And how that's reaching so many people so fast and making other ideas actually that were there maybe philosophically hundreds of years ago, but they weren't believable until today. You know, the idea there's no objective reality to your body, that you're perfectly malleable and you can be whatever you want. Well, even most people that might hear that in a classroom didn't really believe it in the locker room, you know, so they wouldn't buy that. But now with digital technology, this one lady I was mentioning to you, who's been studying the effects of technology at MIT for 30, 40 years. And like she was saying, when she was studying youth engaged in use of internet, the longer they were there, the more disassociated with their own bodies they were. They really began to believe, their brains began to identify with avatars on the screen and things like that. And you can imagine what's the cumulative effect of doing that for thousands and thousands of hours, of viewing yourself as a, whether it's a boy playing a girl character or you're a giant green monster, you really do start to believe, I can be something completely other than what is possible for me to be. It becomes believable. So you have technology that's actually changing us. It's actually reshaping our brains by using it. That's one of her main points. We don't just use tools. The tools are in turn shaping us. And then you have these philosophical ideas to give it a framework to kind of make sure it stays there. It's not just a quick fad. This could last. And so you have this fusion of technology, bad ideas in the academy trickling down in popular culture. And and sadly, I mean, some of the things people are doing, maybe the problem is you won't see, some sins you don't see the results immediately, right? Like you can sin, you look around, oh, no lightning bolt, God didn't get me, cops didn't come, nobody knows, whatever. But then there are things like, again, what bothers me so much is all the stories of the transgenderism where you have young children who are in a confused stage of life and they're doing things that are irreversible. I mean, absolutely irreversible and terribly harmful. And you know what I mean? Like it's stuff like that, I think, obviously there's a million things we could harp on, but stuff like that, it's like, no, that causes objective problems right now. And we need to get everybody on board of stopping that. And there are quote unquote reasonable non-believers out there that even acknowledge this is not good. Mm-hmm. We should not be giving hormone blockers to 12-year-olds. They're like, I didn't know what the heck I was going to be or who I was or what I was going to do until I was 25. And you're giving hormone blockers to 12-year-olds or having gender reassignment surgery. And it's I think stuff like that. I mean, again, not just Christians. I really want to believe by God's common grace, there's still non-believers out there that are like, hey, even I know that's not good.
Yes.
Absolutely. Mike, you've mentioned that book before when you've been on the program. What is it again?
So I brought a different book today. This one's called Alone Together, subtitle, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. So the author is Sherry Turkle. The other book I mentioned was called Reclaiming Conversation, but she wrote like a trilogy. She's been studying the effects of internet usage and personal computers on people, specifically young people, so elementary, junior high, high school, and then college. And she's been doing it since the 70s. And she got her PhD at Harvard, and I believe she's still at MIT. So, and again, she doesn't have a Christian bias, in my understanding, and it's a good thing. She probably wrote this, 15 years ago before, because I think she'd probably get blasted, even though she doesn't go down any kind of conservative sort of ideology at all, but she's simply reporting her findings, which I think tends to support more of a conservative or evangelical point of view on this issue. Yeah. But things are so polarized, I think people would probably drag her through the mud. But honestly, it's really, really fascinating stuff. And I think for parents, that's really something important to read, because even as Christians, even if I monitor the content of what my children are watching online, even the amount of time and what it's doing to their brain, I want to be informed about that so that we can make good decisions.
And I think what we're really talking about here that kind of prompted this was the question of, hey, how do I make these judgments as it relates to the moral law if I feel like I'm not living up to it? Well, what we're talking about is just this sense of guilt, this standard that's been broken, that this individual questioner realizes that I fail to meet this standard. And what we're saying is there's a lot of people that won't feel like they're failing to meet the standard. So John Hare, a philosopher out of Yale, he gives this idea in his book called The Moral Gap. And what he is saying is there is this gap between what we know we ought to do and what we do. That there's this standard that all of us don't seem like we can meet. So now then, what are you going to do when there's this moral standard? And this is where our culture changes. What do you do when there's this moral standard that you don't think you can meet? Well, you can try to obtain the standard and close the gap by meeting it on your own, okay, which that will only lead to more frustration because nobody's going to be able to meet that standard. Or what you can do is you can lower the standard to make it something that you can reach. And in other words, you can change the laws, so to speak, that people think. And now we can say what was once called evil that created shame and guilt in us, we can actually say that the church was an oppressor, and we need to overthrow that, shrink the moral law down, take it away from the person of God and his objectivity, and put it in the subject, and let us be the ones who define what right and wrong is, and take on that Nietzschean spirit. And so now you erase it, right? And then the other option would be to come up with different substitute, like naturalistic substitutes. And this would be where I could get into different moral theories, and I won't do that right here. But all that say, in this book, by the way, if someone's going to read it, they're going to want to put their thinking cap on. So I don't want anybody to think that this is going to be for that faint of heart. But it is a very good read on this stuff. So what we're talking about then is evangelism used to be so easy. Go out and tell people that they're moral lawbreakers, and they'll recognize that they've sinned, and they'll want to place their faith in Jesus. And what I want to say is the context of our culture's changed. We live in a culture that looks like this. It's militant in its secularism. It's pluralistic because we're a melting pot with different worldviews that are clashing together. We're morally relativistic. These are the kind of things that we have in our culture. We're obsessed with our sexuality. And so that said, how then do we talk to these people about the moral law? Well, I think we have to, and my fear is that a lot of pastors and churches don't understand how we got to where we are. And if we don't understand how we got to where we are, we're not going to know how to get people out of where we are. And so just sharing the 4 spiritual laws with people, that it's not that easy anymore. We have to think.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, it's like Leslie Newbegin would say, coming back from 40 years of ministry in India, that the West is a non-Christian culture. It's not just a non-Christian culture; it's a post-Christian culture. So it's actually it's not even, say a third world non-Christian culture. It's sort of built up antibodies, as it were, resistance to particular presentations of the gospel, different, just certain ideas and ways of presenting things. And again, the task for the Christian is never to give up timeless truth, right? So we never, ever change that. But in terms of how we present that methodology, the language, or at the very least, look at it this way, listening to the culture in order to understand it so that you can speak the gospel intelligently.
Yes.
And you can't assume that if you could speak to somebody 50 years ago here, well, you can just as easily speak to a young person today. That seems not to be the case anymore.
That's right.
So instead of asking the question that we've always asked, if you were to die tonight, are you 100% sure that you'd go to heaven? It might be more a question like, so how's that working out for you, whatever your that is? Because
here's the thing. If you were to die tonight, are you 100% sure you would go to heaven? Well, you'll have a lot of people that might just say, I don't even believe that there's a thing called heaven. So what you've got is to understand, what you have to do is understand the mindset and the presuppositions that people have. So to go and ask somebody if they're sure that they're going to go to heaven, well, maybe the question be, why are you so sure there's not one? Why don't you believe that God exists? And then we could talk about what that means that he does exist. I mean, you even have a group of people that are known as apatheists. And an apatheist is one that is apathetic about whether God exists or not. And so how do you do evangelism with somebody who's an apatheist? Because here's the deal. The apatheist isn't saying that God does exist or that God does not exist. The apatheist is saying it doesn't matter to me.
So it's different from being agnostic.
Well, it can be because, but it is a form of agnosticism. But look at it like this: it is agnostic, but it's a type of agnosticism. So some agnostics are agnostic, but they will engage the conversation about whether or not God exists or not.
Right.
An apatheist. If you try, they won't even bother. So now you got a person that you work with, and you want to talk to them about if they were to die, how do they know they're going to go to heaven? But if they're an apatheist, they won't even engage in a conversation because they think it's a waste of time, because they'll say, you can't prove whether God exists or doesn't. That's why the debate continues. So I'm going to peace out on that, and I'm not even going to enter into the discussion because it's a fool's errand. So now we have to think apologetically, how do we get the apatheists to no longer be apathetic about their agnosticism?
Yeah.
Like, isn't this crazy?
Boy, do we have our work cut out.
Bobby.
Yes.
That's Bobby's job.
Wow.
So we've covered some ground, and we're just touching the iceberg.
Yeah. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you for sending in that question on the Messenger feature on Facebook. Hey, thank you for watching this segment of Pastor's Perspective. Remember to subscribe to our channel, like this video, leave a comment even, and click the bell icon to get notified every time we do something special like this. And remember to share this video with your friends. God bless you guys. Thank you for supporting Pastor's Perspective.